Hey everyone, welcome back to the Promised Land podcast with me, Scott Saunders, talking all things Manchester United. The FA Cup is back for United this weekend. Sunday afternoon sees United travel to Arsenal in the third round of the competition. Could not have really asked for a worse draw, although Arsenal at the moment not firing on all cylinders. Bukayo Saka is injured. They've just lost at home to Newcastle in the League Cup, and United have just put in their best performance in a good while in the draw with Liverpool last weekend. So obviously, when this draw was made, I think most of us thought, oh no, that's us out of the FA Cup straight off. The defense of the trophy is going to be short-lived and that kind of thing. But maybe just some hope that United can pull off what would be an upset on the day at the Emirates. But obviously, there's lots going on off the pitch as well. So that's what I'll spend a fair bit of time talking about on today's show. Lots of contract talk, lots of rumors. It's the January transfer window. Obviously, that means United are going to sign £300 million worth of players and then sign nobody or sign somebody on a loan deal on transfer deadline day. Obviously, that's the way it goes. Obviously, there's loads of people being frantic about PSR restrictions, FFP difficulties, this kind of thing. Those are real things. And I will talk about the position that United find themselves in this month in relation to a number of players. I'll address some of the reports in a little bit more detail that we've seen this week regarding potentially selling Kobbie Mainoo. I'll have a little talk about my thoughts on that situation and those reports in a little bit. I do realize that perhaps stirring United fans into a frenzy so people rage click on articles or engage with certain things on social media channels, this kind of thing. That's design. It's all design. And unfortunately, that's with United being the biggest club in the world, or one of the biggest clubs in the world. I'll say biggest club in the world just because this is a United podcast, and I think they are right up there alongside Real Madrid. But obviously, there's a lot of interest and a lot of noise that goes on around Man United, and you have to keep the news cycle going, guys. So I think there's been a bit of that for me this week. Obviously, we've had some great news, though. Amad Diallo has signed a new 5-year contract until 2030, and I think it's quite interesting to see where he will fit in the wage structure at Old Trafford, which I think United are, and the owners and the people that are in charge running this club at the moment, they need to fix that wage structure. They need to start raising some money, clearing the decks, restructuring the whole thing. And maybe that'll go a fair bit of a way to correcting some of the problems that United have on the pitch as well. I'll talk about a bunch of that on today's show. But yes, please subscribe to the show if you've not done so already on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube as well. The Promised Land and Manchester United podcast. Give me a follow on social media at @Scott Saunders on X, TikTok, and Instagram. I'm also on Blue Sky and I've been posting on there. The link is in the description if you'd like to follow me on there, and that is your preferred platform of choice. And also at TPL MUFC on YouTube and on X as well if you want to get in touch with the show. I'll be posting updates about when I'm coming out next and what I'm going to talk about maybe in the future. There's still a few things for me to do in terms of getting this up and running and looking the exact right way, especially on YouTube over the next few weeks. But the good news is, if you listened to the show the other day, that I think the new era is starting, and fingers crossed, we'll start to build up a bit ahead of steam. United their form will turn around on the pitch and we can have better conversations than we've been having over the last few months with United in absolute disarray, both on and off the pitch. But obviously, United could go and lose heavily at Arsenal at the weekend, and then we're all back to absolute misery. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, what I try and do on this podcast is try and go a little bit more straight and narrow, straight down the line. And never too high, never too low is the way that we approach things here. If you like that, please subscribe on all the platforms I just mentioned and follow me on social media as well. Big thank you to everybody who's got in touch with me after my last recording. Put it out on Wednesday, I believe, and had a great reception. The amount of people that sent me messages and wishes of good luck and this kind of thing, even retweeting the fact that the podcast was coming back, massively appreciated, honestly. And I have seen a bunch of the comments. And what I would like to do in the future is maybe do more question and answer episodes, because I think some of your guys' comments are really thought provoking, and I think it's good enough for me to kind of center a show around what everybody thinks. So I'd really like to do that. Encourage you guys to get in touch with me on all the platforms I just mentioned, and hopefully we can elevate the levels of conversation that we have moving forward. I've got a ton of ideas. I've seen your shouts for potential co-hosts. I am thinking about things to change things up a little bit. But what I would like to do is bring this podcast to you as frequently as I possibly can. And we'll go from there, really. There's always something to talk about with Manchester United. There might not always be the appetite to consume all of that. And I think that's where I've been sitting over the past few weeks and few months, with generally doom and gloom absolutely everywhere. The position in the league is obviously awful, but I think you have to sink to your lowest before you kind of start coming back up and making things better and getting things right. So that's how I've tried to take it. And hopefully, if you guys are looking for something a little bit more straight and narrow, never too high, never too low, this is the place that you will come to. I would really appreciate it if you continue supporting the show, continue supporting on social media through word of mouth. If you're a match-going fan as well, any United fans even who you think might resonate with some of the stuff that we say on this show, or maybe wants a different point of view on things, I will hopefully bring that to whoever is listening and to whoever is watching as well. That's certainly what I'm trying to achieve with the experience that I've accumulated over the last decade plus. And obviously I've been a United fan for 30 years as well. So I've seen all the good times. This last decade has been difficult, but hey, fingers crossed things can start turning around soon. What I did want to talk about today is the January transfer window, the wage structure, if there's any wiggle room, if it's worth United fans panicking, talking a little bit about Amad Diallo, Kobbie Mainoo, Marcus Rashford, Casemiro. I think all of these players, I'll touch on them briefly, but I think maybe in Rashford and Casemiro's case, that both of those players could, I think it's quite likely that one of the two, if not both, could leave the club before the end of the transfer window, whether that's on a permanent deal in Casemiro's case or on loan in Marcus Rashford's case. We will see. I'll talk about those in a bit more depth when we get some concrete developments on them. But obviously there's talks going on at the moment with both of those players potentially leaving. And also there's a lot of panic because we see what's happening on the pitch and think, God, United need reinforcements. I know that. I absolutely know that. But I think the case is at the moment, United are in a bit of a sell to buy bind, and you will probably need to see players leaving before players come in, unless they can find a relatively cheap loan deal for, an experienced first team player to come in, or somebody who would improve the first team. United are making a young signing, Diego Leon, who's going to join, I think, from Monday or like in the next few days from South America. More of those signings, please, is what I will say. And maybe we can go into that in a bit more depth in the future as well, maybe next week. But the game against Arsenal is obviously on the agenda. I'll look at that, share my thoughts on what I think we could maybe expect or hope for in that game, and just talk a little about INEOS and the Glazer dynamic, because there's a lot of frustration on INEOS's door at the moment, and I understand why. But I just wanted to try and get my point across with how I feel about this. And we always need somebody to blame, right? And I think that is I'm seeing that with a lot of people at the moment, or maybe it's a social media thing, but yeah, I feel like they are brave enough to take these challenges on head on, whereas the Glazer family have not been brave enough to take these challenges on head on. They've thrown a bunch of money at stuff that isn't even their own to fix things, and made the problem a hell of a lot worse over the last few years. And what I see with INEOS is they've stepped in and they're brave enough to try and turn this around. So maybe that's not a popular opinion for everybody, but it's certainly how I look at things. And I'll maybe explain a little bit later in the show about my feelings on that. But let's start a little bit with some Ahmad talk. Let's start with Ahmad because it's a 5-year deal for him. That was signed on Thursday, as I say this. It's Friday the 10th today. So Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, United announced that Amad Diallo has signed a new deal until 2030. And what I just wanted to say to start with, fantastic news, absolutely warranted, supremely deserved. And I'm so happy that what United have done here, what maybe Ruben Amorim and what Ruud van Nistelrooy have done over the last few months is put such a talented lad who has a fantastic attitude, who has great skills, great mentality, comes up with match-winning moments. We've seen him do it against Liverpool and against Manchester City. Liverpool, obviously, in the FA Cup last year, and the Man City game a month or so ago. And then he scored at Anfield as well in United's last match. And I think the ascension of Amad from essentially forgotten attacker, or for whatever reason, Erik ten Hag didn't want to play him. He preferred to play other players ahead of him. And I know it was a source of frustration for a lot of people. But I'm so glad that Amad has got his chance and he's taken it with both hands and he's been rewarded for it. So happy for him. It's how United should work. It really is. When a player comes in, and I'll say this, I mean, when there was massive clamour for Amad to come in and you saw him maybe make some appearances, but not maybe make that much of an impact, and then he didn't get many chances to extend that and to continue trying to make an impact on matches. I hadn't seen enough at that time for me to be convinced that Amad was warranting a regular first team place, like many others were. But obviously, I think when you're a young player and you're trying to make an effort to break into the first team, one of the biggest clubs in the world, if not the biggest club in the world, and the team is failing, it's pretty difficult. And I think with in Erik ten Hag's case, he had his own preferred players, and in the end, that's one of the contributing factors to the reason why he ended up leaving the club and being sacked. But as much as I'd have liked to have seen Amad break into the first team over the months that Erik ten Hag was in charge, it was unfortunate. But what we have seen since Ruud van Nistelrooy came in as interim and since Ruben Amorim has come in is this player make such an impact on this team and lead by example. It doesn't seem like the loudest voice or the noisiest guy or whatever, but he leads by example in his actions and he makes a difference on the pitch. All he needed was that chance, that ability to be able to build his confidence playing in a United shirt in an advanced position as well. And now we're really seeing that bear fruit. And I'm just glad because obviously he was out of contract in 6 months. United did have an option to trigger on that contract to keep him at the club if all else failed. But what he has got is that option was not triggered, and he's got a pay rise, which I think he's quadrupling essentially from what reports I've seen. I think he's quadrupling what he's earning, and he's now very much in line with a lot of United's first team players. Let's just say that. And I will talk about the wage bill in a little bit, but it's a good decision, obviously, to renew him. It's a fantastic move for the player himself. I'm so thrilled and so happy that he will spend the next 5 years playing for United, because I feel like United need more players like Amad with the desire, with the talent levels, with the mentality. You need to fill your team with players like that. And if United are rebuilding their squad again, more players like this are necessary. And I hope that players who are signed in the future are more in the ilk of what Amad is displaying. They don't always have to be all that, like, as talented as this lad is, but the mentality is the biggest thing. The mentality is, for me, been one of the biggest problems at United in the last decade. They've not managed to fix it. The problem is exacerbated to levels where we now see United 13th in the Premier League, and there's some players in this team who are earning massive money and not playing and are at the club for the wrong reasons. And it's not. I'm talking about. That's not a dig at Casemiro specifically there, but obviously we all remember when that Casemiro signing was made. He was brought in. He said famously, "I'll fix this," and he did for a year or so. But he was 30, 31 years old, signing for 60 million quid on about 350k a week, and that's a short-term purchase. And obviously United are now paying for that. What United need to do is fill their team up with players like Ahmad. Obviously, with different attributes and different skills, this kind of thing. But the energy levels, the fight, the will, the mentality is exactly why Ahmad deserved this new contract. And he started out under Ruben Amorim in that right wing back role. And I said, I think around that time that I would love to see him just in one of those 10 roles just behind the striker. He's moved there. And I think that's going to be his best position. I think he's nailed it down. Honestly, I think he's one of the first names on the team sheet, bar in rotation. But his ability to carry the ball, his ability to beat players is something that United need in those areas. His creativity is something United need, and his decisiveness as well is something that United need. So I'm just really happy, and I'm sure most of you are as well, really happy that Ahmad has signed this new contract. And it's just good that we can think, right, okay, that settled. We don't have to worry about that anymore. But there's other players around Ahmad who, I think there's other work to do. Let's just say that. Now, I'm gonna transition a little bit here, I think, into the wage structure. So, allow me to just. I'm bringing up my phone here because I have screenshotted this, and these aren't always super accurate, but you do kind of get a sense of a club's wage structure just through like online reports, and you speak to people, this kind of thing, and get an understanding of the wage structure of a football club. We know that United are one of the highest paying football clubs in terms of their wages in the world, even though they're 13th in the league and haven't won the Premier League for, what is it now? It's 12 years this year. Oh my God. 12 years. And what United have done over those 12 years is just dig themselves into a deeper and deeper mess. Now, for those of you who are on YouTube, I'm sure you can, I'm just going to be looking at my phone for a second, but for those of you on audio, I'll kind of call these out for you to give you maybe an idea of what I think United are trying to do with their wage bill. And I'm sure if you're on YouTube or if you're on a computer or something like that, you can just give this a quick Google and find these numbers out there. But where I think Ahmad is fixing into this, if you look at the wage structure, is pretty. These numbers aren't obviously official, but you've got Andre Onana, Lisandro Martinez, Mamadou Ugarte on around about £120,000 a week. Nusayr Mazraoui a little bit higher than that. And then the likes of Lenny Yoro, 115, Rasmus Højlund, 85, Joshua Zirkzee, 105. Like these players are regular first team players. And what I'm trying to say here is, per what I've read and what I've seen and what I've been told, it looks like Ahmad is going to be in that range alongside Andre Onana, Lisandro Martinez, Mamadou Ugarte, those kinds of players who are playing football for United pretty much every week now. I think what we're seeing there is a basing in what United want their wage structure to be moving forward. And it's more in line with where they should be. Let's just say that. Now, Onana, Martinez, Ugarte, Yoro, Zirkzee, maybe give or take Zirkzee, we don't really know what's going to happen with him. But those players that I just mentioned there are all players that you could expect will play for United for a good couple of years. In Lenny Yoro's case, you hope he'll play with this team for a long, long time and eventually become one of the club's highest earners if he's to fulfill his potential. But in terms of where he is ability-wise versus potential versus standing in the team, I think that's maybe a fair reflection. And I think maybe that is where Ahmad is going to fit as well. The last thing that United wanted to do here was cave in and put Ahmad towards the top of that wage list. Now, Follow me on TikTok. Actually, I did talk about this a little bit on TikTok yesterday. I am 35 years old. I'm making TikToks unbelievable, but needs must. There is a structure at the top where there's 5 players, or maybe 6 players if you include Jadon Sancho, 5 or 6 players on over £200,000 a week, and Casemiro is the top earner at around 350. Now, the earnings go Casemiro, Bruno Fernandes, and Marcus Rashford are pretty much the top 3. And of those 3, 2 of those players, United are looking to get off their wage bill and off the books at the moment because they're not performing to the levels that United really require of them. As I referenced just now, Casemiro's contract is a big problem for United, and is just they need to get that off the wage bill, and they were always going to encounter this problem at some point. But Marcus Rashford as well was given a massive contract after his great season, and the levels have fallen off. And now we're talking about potentially sending Marcus Rashford out on loan to AC Milan, Juventus, Borussia Dortmund, or Como, or even West Ham have been linked in the last few days. I just really can't see that happening at all. Essentially, what I'm trying to say here is that what I think United need to do to start with is re-establish their wage structure and re-establish who their top earners are, how much they earn, and that will then enable them to structure new signings moving forward. And maybe if there's a player that they want to sign who sees that Casemiro is the top earner and knows that's the ceiling that they can get, obviously they're going to ask for more money. And I'll talk about Kobbie Mainoo in a second and the reports regarding the demands in that deal. But it's so incredibly important that United and the people making these decisions bring that wage bill down, because we know of the financial problems that United have. But what it also creates, having a massive wage bill with loads of high earners in it. Some of these earners are the highest in the Premier League, and United are 13th. It's just not, you can't do it. You can't get away with it. Casemiro's what, 33, 34 years old, 32 years old or whatever. And there's no sell-on value there, really. There's no immediate future for him. I would be surprised, to be honest, if he's still at the club by the end of this month. I think there's a route to Saudi Arabia, which looks like it's opening up for him. And fingers crossed, United can receive some money back for him, because they've paid 60 million. And, if you can get 25 million, 20 million, 30 million for him, then that can obviously alleviate the financial position, and the wages go with it as well. So United really need to create some wiggle room for themselves. But you can just look at that list of players and think, Mason Mount, 250, Anthony, 200. That is not value for money. Let's just say that. And United have made some bad decisions over the last few years, and they're ultimately having to pay for them now. And I'll talk about Kobbie Mainoo in a second. I'll talk about some other things as well regarding sales of Rashford and Casemiro, maybe in a little bit more depth, and the criticism that INEOS have been receiving over the past few weeks. I'll talk about all that just after this. So let's get back to it then. Let's talk a little bit about Kobbie Mainoo, because I know that the panic has set in. Maybe not for everybody, but obviously early this week, we saw a pretty big bombshell of a report saying Man United are open to selling Kobbie Mainoo because of the financial problems that they're suffering and the alleviation that selling Kobbie Mainoo would give on the team's finances. Now, I'm sure most of you, if you're watching this and listen to this, I'm sure most of you know kind of the difference by now between selling an academy player and selling a player that has been signed from elsewhere. I'm sure you know the difference, but just from a brief summary, brief explanation. If clubs sell players that they have developed through their academy, they get to bank all of the money on their books, and therefore it gives them more wiggle room in the transfer market to reinvest and to essentially make sure that they are not too close to their FFP limits. So we've seen clubs like Chelsea over the last few years selling their academy players and going and buying other players with amortized deals, which they can book over 5 years, 8 years in some cases. But when you sell a player, obviously you get to book all that value straight on for that year's that year's financial accounts, and it gives you a bit more wiggle room. So we've seen Chelsea do it a hell of a lot, and they've obviously spent £1 billion or whatever it is in the space of a few years. And to the point now where it's even rumored over the last few days that Trevor Chalobah, who they essentially threw out in the summer and made him go out on loan to Crystal Palace because they couldn't sell him. There's rumors now that maybe they might bring him back or use him as leverage in a deal to sign Mark Gahey, who was also a Chelsea Academy player that has been sold. So Chelsea have, ticked off some of their fan base. I will say that. But the fact that Chelsea were doing that shows the appeal of actually doing it in order to turn your club around and to rebuild your team. United obviously did this in the summer as well with Scott McTominay selling him to Napoli, and that allowed them a little bit more wiggle room and a bit more space. I think it was to get the Manuel Ugarte deal over the line. And it's sad and unfortunate, really, for a lot of people that United ended up selling McTominay, but I think justified for a lot of people as well, because he wasn't really the right fit in Erik ten Hag's team at the time, even though he did come up with numerous late goals to win matches or claw points back for United last season and over the course of his career at United as well. And Ugarte, I think, is a better fit for the team now, especially under Ruben Amorim. So maybe that was a justified move in the circumstances. But obviously, selling academy players is a big, difficult thing for people to get over. And I think the biggest thing for people to get over, and something that nobody even wants to consider, is potentially selling Kobbie Mainoo. And I am one of those people. Don't get me wrong. I am one of those people. Please do not do that. Absolutely. I love this kid. I think he is unbelievably talented. There's so much of a ceiling for him. Head is screwed on. Great attitude. And I think from what I've seen so far, I do think that Mainoo maybe has not adapted to Ruben Amorim's team straight off and straight away as well as I thought he might have. But obviously things are going to take time, and you've got to learn the tactics and this kind of thing. You've got to learn the fundamentals of the team. And obviously United and Amorim haven't had that much time at the moment to make sure that all of their players know exactly what the plan is, because there's been so many matches. I think maybe Mainoo lacks a little bit in recovery pace, and that could be a concern, but there's so many good elements to his game even in this system, to the point where I think him and Manuel Ugarte, I hope that is the central midfield pairing that we get to see on the regular over the next few weeks, barring rotation, like I say, to make sure that people are kept fresh. But I think that midfield pairing has a lot of good in it. And I think there's more depth needed underneath it. And United will need to sign probably 2 more central midfield players over the next few transfer windows. But if you can work with Ugarte and Mainoo and a couple of others who have the right energy and have the right the ability to cover grass and to break up play in Ugarte's case, or distribute the ball or carry the ball in Kobbie Mainoo's case, then rotation becomes a lot easier and you can deal with competitions, this kind of thing. No, but the mere fact that Kobbie Mainoo is the latest name to be talked about and rumored with a United exit is painful. It really is. It really, really is. And I waited to record this podcast today until after Ruben Amorim's press conference. So here's what he said. If you haven't caught it yet, here's what he said. He was asked about academy players and Kobbie Mainoo and this kind of thing. And what he said was, yes, my players are always my favorites. So I really love my players. I want to keep my players, especially the talented ones, where he was talking about Mainoo. It's a special moment in this club, a hard moment. I'm really happy with Kobbie. He's improving. And also with Ghana, Alejandro Garnacho. He was asked a little bit about whether how much he wanted to bring new players in this month. And what he said is sometimes the profile for this system is different and the players came here with a different idea of how to play. I don't remember to say so clearly that I want new players. What I said is that we need to improve recruitment when we're targeting them, but be sure they cope with the demand. Sometimes you have to bet a little bit. And what I said is we also have to improve our academy to bring in young kids that feel the club in the right way. And with that rules, we're able to do some business and have the money to reinvest in the team. Our idea is always to keep the best players and the players that we build for this club, but we know the position the club is in at the moment. We will see. But I'm very happy. I really like the players, especially the guys from the academy. Now, we will see is never fun. It's never a good word, is it? I remember when United won the Champions League in 2008, and there was lots of rumors going on around Cristiano Ronaldo potentially leaving. I think he was interviewed on the pitch in Moscow. I remember watching it, thinking, "Oh no, I hope he doesn't leave." And he would say the line, "We will see," or "Only God knows." And you kind of, ever since that point when I heard a "we will see," you kind of think, "Oh, actually, it's a possibility." And that's a very, very scary prospect. And then obviously over that summer, United had, or Alex Ferguson had struck an agreement with Ronaldo, agreed that he stayed another year and he was sold the next year for a world record fee of like 80 million quid. But we will see is a little bit worrying. But what I will say is, I think the way that Amram deals with the press, I think is fantastic, honestly. Because what I didn't tell you in that, if you haven't watched the press conference or listened to it, he was asked about Marcus Rashford and Kobbie Mainoo and the positions on the club's positions on whether they keep those players or sell them. Because obviously they're both academy products who've come through the academy. And let's be real, one is probably more likely to leave this month than the other one is. I think with Marcus Rashford's lack of game time over the last few weeks, probably make him quite likely to leave. But it really depends on the deal that United can find, how much United can convince another club to pay in Rashford's wages, how much to cover, and what the fee is for either a permanent deal or for a loan deal. But yeah, what I will say is I think Amorim deals with the press really well. I've been really impressed with how he takes questions on, how honest he is. And I think, look, in the moment where he said our idea is always to keep the best players and the players that we build for this club, but we know the position the club is in at the moment and we'll see, is honest. It's honest. He has to be honest. Because United need to get themselves out of this mess somehow. And obviously, looking at players who are come through the academy on lower wages, they're probably easier to flip for a lot of money in terms of transfer fees than other players who are on £350,000 a week, for example. But look, I think the conversation, everyone's just been sent into meltdown over the last few days. I don't think it's time to panic, guys. I will say that. I don't think this is the time to panic or worry. It's just real. That's the position that United are in at the moment. And I would be absolutely shocked. Touch wood. I'm touching wood. I'm touching the desk here. I would be shocked if we saw Kobbie Mainoo leave the club this month or in the summer. I really, really would. What's simply happening is a couple of things. So United are making their position clear that they know that they need to offload players, but it's probably right that no players should be off limits, I would say. As much of a risk as that is to say, I think the ultimate most important thing here is the football club and making sure that the football club is on the right footing. Now, I do not want Kobbie Mainoo. He would be the last player that I pick for United to sell. But they're in such a bad position at the moment that you're saying that if a team comes in and offers like 150 million quid, that United would just think, no, absolutely not. Maybe you do want United to be that, but I think if that was to come around or whatever, then that's a very, very big decision to make, because that kind of money for an academy prospect would make such a difference to the overall health of the club for the years to come. And look, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that kind of money rolls around anymore at all. And ultimately, I think we all want to see Kobbie Mainoo start in this team, grow in this team, have amazing moments over the course of his career, wear that red shirt, and spend the majority of his career, if not all of his career, with United at the moment, because that is what great academy players have done in the past and what we hope they continue to do. But there's also a realism to this, and you have to think, the mess that United are in at the moment is massive, and they need to find ways around it. And ultimately, there's going to be players like this who are the biggest difference makers, I will say. This isn't for me to say that I think this will happen or I want it to happen, but I think this is the other important point that I wanted to make. Always think, this is just advice from me to you if you're listening. Given I've worked in media for a decade, right, and I've been on the other side of this, always think, am I being stirred into frenzy here? Is this actually real? Is this over the top? Is this something I should generally be worried about? Or is this just there to rile me up and make me click different pages and make me think, I need more information on this, or I'm going to shout about this on social media, this kind of thing. It's all a big game, guys. It's all a big game. And I think it's worth taking a step back sometimes and thinking, all right, but I see the real side of this. And like I say, never too high, never too low. I try and come down the middle. And I'm trying to here. The fact that United are in such a bad position financially at the moment, they need to make drastic decisions and big decisions potentially to turn things around. And a deal like that would really, really help them, even though it's probably a time where fan sentiment is at an all-time low with everything that INEOS have done over the last few months and last year or so. Fan sentiment is an all-time low. And I think what's happened here is just, hey, fan sentiment's an all-time low. Let's rile them up a bit more. Do you think? I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. And I do like to just take a step back and think, is this actually going to happen? Look, I don't think so. You got to think of this as well. How many clubs out there can actually afford to go do this? There ain't many at all. Chelsea are the one that's been linked, and I think the report that I saw was United have valued Mainoo at 70 million, and they would sell for that. And Mainoo is irritated at, or Mainoo's camp. I'm not saying Mainoo, but this is, I'm just attributing what the reports say here. Not always true, by the way. Take them with a pinch of salt. But the general feeling and vibe around what the players' camp would want to renew is something in the region of £200,000 a week. Now, let me just roll back to what I said earlier about the wage bill. Anthony's on 200k a week, give or take. Isn't in the team. Mason Mount's on more. Isn't in the team because he's injured. Marcus Rashford's on more. Isn't in the team. Casemiro's on the highest wages. Isn't in the team. The only player at that kind of level, although higher, is Bruno Fernandes, who, in my opinion, if there is going to be a player who is earning massive money and is the top of the wage ceiling, it's probably Bruno Fernandes, because he is one of the very few players over the last few years playing for Man United who has improved, carried the club on his shoulders, and taken responsibility. Not in every case, whatever you think of him, but he wears the armband, and he is probably United's most effective player over the last 5 years, I would say. And I think that's pretty difficult to disagree with. So maybe he's justified in the sense of he's top of the tree. And even that contract was given out in the summer. He had an increase, but I think that's only until 2027. So if you look at it now, or 2028, I think it's 2027. If you look at it now, there's only a couple of years left on that contract. So what we're trying to see here is a reestablishment of the wage structure. And if it is the case that Kobbie Mainoo's camp is asking for £200,000 a week, United really have to think of the structure that they're building. And then I roll back to Onana, Martinez, Ugarte, where we think Ahmad is as well, around the 120 range. You know, I'm not saying that Mainoo fits in that range, but if it was more akin to that range, it would make a lot of sense in terms of the players that are playing in the first team at the moment. And given he's only 19 years old as well, I think that is probably the right place. Ensures he fits in the wage structure moving forward over the next few years. And what will happen over the next few years as well is that those top earners at the top of the list will be sold or loaned out, and all of those high earners will be chipped away, and we essentially won't see that wage structure and the top of that wage structure in place anymore. Maybe it's somewhere more in line with the top earner gets 250 or something like that, and players earn their way up as they improve. And I think it's all a big negotiation at the end. It's also important to think this. Kobbie Mainoo is contracted until 2027 with an extra year's option, I do believe. So that's quite a way away yet. And I think there's plenty of time to fix that. The transfer market is not exactly fraught with loads of money at the moment, unless it's from, but even the Saudi Arabia spending has cooled down a little bit over the last year. I guess I'm just saying, you might see the reports. There's probably validity in a lot of what is said because of the financial position that United are in. There's validity in it, but don't get sucked into it, and don't feel like it's a certainty to happen or that INEOS are ruining the club. And I think that is the good transition point here for me to address something that I did want to talk about on the show today. Been going a lot longer than I actually anticipated. So here goes. Let's see. Maybe I'll do it a bit quickly. Obviously, the Arsenal game is coming up at the weekend, and I think maybe I'll do that now, and I'll finish with the INEOS thing. So the Arsenal game's coming up in the FA Cup. Arsenal are not firing on all cylinders, and I think I touched on it on the last show. It's a good time to play Arsenal, I think. Really good time to play Arsenal. Not low on confidence, but there's a lot of sentiment among that club at the moment where they're not really catching Liverpool. They're not scoring free-flowing goals. They have a great set-piece threat, and maybe that could be the undoing of United over the weekend. But they're not free-flowing, and I think that season where everyone hoped that Arsenal would kick on it's not panning out that way. So if their goal threat isn't really there, then maybe United have a chance. So let's see how it goes. And ultimately, look, it's a difficult tie away from home in the FA Cup. Arsenal are still second, third in the league. And ultimately, they're still the favourites. United are 13th. So I'm not expecting to come away from there with qualification for the next round. It would be lovely to win. But at the same time, I think we're in a season here where the main thing is to try and get as high up the league as possible. Try and get in the Champions League. I think I'll talk more about the Europa League in the coming weeks. I think there should be a lot of focus on that competition. I really, really do. And look, as lovely as it is to win the FA Cup, more FA Cup games you play, the more matches you play. And if you've got a squad that is bloated and you're looking to ship players off, and let's say United go out of the FA Cup this weekend, that's 1, 2, potentially 4 or 5 games less this season that they'll have to play. I don't want to look at it that way, because ultimately winning the FA Cup is an amazing thing, and it was amazing last year, but obviously it didn't cover all the cracks. And Erik ten Hag lost his job within about 8-9 games of the new season. So look, we'll see how it goes. I think Ruben Amorim said today that you'll get a pretty much full strength United team, because that's what he wants to see. And fingers crossed we do. And United give Arsenal a good game. And I said it in the last episode as well. After the Liverpool game, such a difficult game away from home, United put in a great performance. And I think going into an easy game, or an easier game, which United were expected to win, like the Southampton game that's coming up in midweek, maybe this kind of game, this challenge away from home, after that result, will nail down the fact that United have to continue concentrating, and they have to be as good as they were last weekend, if not better, to go and win this game as well. And maybe that week of being able to drill in that message of, you do not stop concentrating for 1 single second. You always stay on your job. You always make sure that you're doing your job. You always give 100% effort. A week or so of drilling that message in for this Arsenal game and beyond that may be good for the team. So I think this is a good time to play Arsenal, both in the sense of how Arsenal are doing in terms of their form and in terms of how United should have been in training this week. But I think, look, I'm not going to make any predictions, but I think United have a chance. I'll say that. So let me know in the comments what you think and if United will progress. That game's on Sunday at 3:00, I believe, if you're in the UK. But I'll circle back to the criticism that INEOS have been getting over the last week regarding that Kobbie Mainoo report. And obviously there's other stuff which has happened over the last few months, which I do not agree with in terms of ticket prices, in terms of the prioritization or the essentially dismissal of the importance of the women's team. I think is awful. I honestly do. And there's a lot of things that I do not agree with that INEOS have been doing over the last year or so. I think a lot of what has been said is ill-advised and just bad, I will say. But there are... This is not... For me, this is not sympathy I have with them. It's just I look at the situation for what it is and just think people are focusing their blame in the wrong place. In terms of the aspects of like how INEOS are trying to cut costs. I think people are not remembering, and I think that I said this pretty early on in INEOS's takeover, and last week as well, or in the last episode. INEOS are clearing up the mess of an ownership that has plunged United into these problems that they have in the first place. They are making the tough decisions the Glazer family were too scared to make. The Glazers should have done this a long time ago. They have not invested a dime of their money, a little bit of their money. And Ratcliffe has come in and INEOS have come in and they have put that money up. 300 million over the past year, I believe. And look, they are making decisions which are not popular at all. But I feel like, I'm not saying commend them for this, but I'm just trying to bring a different point of view here, that difficult decisions like these on cost-cutting measures and on lack of sentiment, United are in that bad a position that these decisions have to be made, and it takes bravery and a certain brashness to be able to pull them off and to just put through and go through with them regardless of pushback, you know? And I think the reports around Mainoo this week, whether this was briefed through to the journalists or not, it just seemed like it was that no players off limits and that they're looking to raise money. No, that's the case. I've seen links with Kvaratskhelia from Napoli over the last few days and all these players. United aren't in that position. They can't just go out and drop 80 million quid in January, let alone in the summer as it stands at the moment. The brief at the moment, I think, is sell to buy. And it's always worth keeping that in mind. Like, we've been conditioned over the last few years as United fans to think, oh, who's this new shiny signing that's coming in next? He's going to fix everything. When it just doesn't work. Does not work at all. Or it works for a little while, in Casemiro's case. And then you're left with a massive contract, which just you're ending up paying for 3, 4, 5 years on top. And all you've got is one good year out of that player. And that's the case. That's the case with Casemiro. Marcus Rashford was given a big deal as a reward for what he'd done in the previous season. And we've not seen the best of him ever since. There are big decisions to make here financially and in terms of cutting costs. And look, I don't like half of these decisions. I don't. But I can recognize as well that INEOS are brave enough to make these decisions, even though they're not going to be popular ones. So all I'll say maybe to end that is, and that's going, basically I wanted to kind of say that in relation to the reports that we've seen on Kobbie Mainoo over the last few days. They're ripping the soul out of the club, this kind of thing I've seen as a criticism on social. They're ripping the soul out of the club, and maybe you feel like that as well, or maybe other people do who are listening to this or not listening to this. They're ripping the soul out of the club. And look, that would be the worst. That would be among the worst ones. It really would. And I get the frustration. I understand it, but that's just simply the place that United are in at the moment. And I'll say it again. INEOS are making tough decisions that the Glazers were too scared to make. And ultimately, if you're looking for somebody to point the finger at here, don't point at the people who are trying to fix it. Point at the people who got United into this mess in the first place. I've seen massive criticism over the last few days for INEOS. I've seen massive criticism from really respected places as well. And I can't help but you need to take a step back and just look at the mess for what it is, and maybe appreciate that there is somebody who's trying their best to get United out of this mess, because it will take a few years and it will take some unpopular decisions in order to do that. It will. And look, that's my position on it. I understand. If you don't agree with me, please let me know. If you don't agree with me, get in touch on social media at @_ Scott Saunders, and get in the comments on this podcast as well at TPLMUFC on YouTube. But look, I think there's a fair bit of stuff to dig your teeth into there. And United play at the weekend. Maybe I'll finish with this. If United go to Arsenal and win, the sentiment changes a little bit. It's not going to fix the financial situation, but at least we'll feel a little bit better about things that are happening on the pitch. Now, I'll be back after that Arsenal game to discuss what we've seen. And fingers crossed we do see some positive stuff. But what I will say, just to finish off here, is try not to just be brought into the panic, because it always seems like there's constant chaos around Manchester United at the moment. And we got to see a great performance at Anfield against Liverpool. Could have won that game in injury time if Harry Maguire had scored. And then the next thing you know, everything's terrible again. Everything's terrible. Just consider, is it manufactured? I don't know. Anyway, right. This has been the Promised Land podcast. Please follow me on all those social channels that I just mentioned at @_ Scott Saunders, and on Blue Sky as well. The links are in the description. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, the Promised Land, a Manchester United podcast. And I'll see you after the Arsenal game to talk about what we've seen in it and what we've learned from United's first FA Cup defense since winning it back in May or June. Anyway, thanks everyone. I've been Scott Saunders. See you soon for another Promised Land podcast.